Welcome back to my first official build of 2022, and it's going to be SCX24 base. It's going to be revolving around this little Special K chassis here. Had this guy printed out in white, got this ordered up off of Etsy. And I'm going to give that guy some low CG with these brass axles front and rear from Mofo RC. So I'll need some front inner axles for those. I've got some rear inner axles. I'm going to use Mofo RC's low speed brass bushings for those axles. And I've got some OEM worm gears, some Trio brass knuckles for some more front weight, some Mofo RC brass steering links for a little more front weight, an older aluminum adjustable Mofo RC servo tray that I pulled off another build, and I'm going to put some aluminum posts on there. And I've got one of his black label servos and his Nano Beast brushless motor and V2 mount for that. I've got an OEM transmission assembly here and some bearings, then a FlySky FSBS 6 and a Furitek Lizard Pro to power this guy. And then because of the short little wheelbase here, we're going to use 4-link kits for deadbolt and Jeep, and I'm going to use the front deadbolt and the front Jeep out of each of those. And then this is a long wheelbase conversion kit that I've had for a while, and I think I'm going to need that battery tray and the ESC tray out of that. Picked up some more drive shafts, so we'll see if we've got all the components we need from the odds and ends I have as well. A couple of options of shocks here. I've got Mofo RC's oil-filled shocks with some aluminum flex blades, or we may use some Hot Racing long travel shocks. I've used those before on a build and I like them. I'm trying out Mofo RC's new adjustable hub deep dish beadlock wheels, where you can pick out the ring as well, the beadlock ring, and I went with the black Super Duty reversibles. And then I got some hubs as well, and some 3 and 6 millimeter inner hubs, depending on the offset that I want. And then these bad boys are the new RC4WD Super Swamper Iroks in the 1-inch size. So these are a new, larger tire from them, about the size of a Scrambler. When we get those out, I'll pull out some larger tires and compare those. So that is basically the overview of the build, and hopefully that's going to get us where we need to go. And I guess we're going to dive right in. Alright, got the front axle and the rear axle together. Had to sand the inside of the knuckle hinge and the top, you can see there, of in the bottom of the axle. To get enough play to have these guys swinging loosely. I think it was just the black coating again, that just a little tolerance issue there, but now they swing easily and freely. So got it hooked up to the servo. Don't have this centered yet, but I just went ahead and connected the assembly. So got those brass bushings in there. Everything is free spinning. The rear, no issues at all. Nice and free spinning. So didn't have enough black hardware for the diff, so I used 4 stainless. So these guys are ready to go. So I think now I'm going to move on to the transmission assembly and get the motor mounted up. And then that will leave the links, chassis, wheels, tires, and then getting in the ESC and receiver. So let's move right along. Okay, we've got the completed motor transmission assembly here. And I'm not going to get too much into this because I just went through this on the last build. I'll just say you're probably going to want to Loctite the 2 motor screws and then definitely this silver idler pinion screw that screws into the motor can, or the motor mount, I guess, because they're screwing through into the metal motor. And then just be very careful, don't hold it by the wires, and don't test it until you get it mounted up and you can actually hold this assembly. And if you're using a Lizard Pro, first thing you want to do is update your firmware to 1.7. These have a problem with 3S and brushless out of the box, so 1.5 fixed that. So I think the current one now is 1.7. So first thing you do is just update the firmware, and then got my servos centered. So everything I think is ready to mount to this frame, or this chassis side, I guess. So I started looking at the battery tray, and if you'll notice that rear leg, it's misaligned with the hole. So I flexed the battery tray and was able to mount it on both sides, but it makes a big curve, you know, and it warps the battery tray. So what I think I'm going to do is just mark it and get a pin vise and try to drill a hole there right behind that existing hole, so this battery tray will lay flat. And then once I get each side, you know, modified and get this tray in, then we can set that motor transmission in. And I believe I've got to chop up this ESC tray a little bit to fit it up under the cab here at an angle, so we'll get to that shortly. All right, got a little progress here. Got the battery tray in, mounted flat. Had to drill a new hole on each side. Had a little trouble getting this guy fitted in the two mount holes. Again, it was just a little bit off, not as far as this one. I double checked it against the deadbolt tray, and of course the mount holes are the same. This is a Jeep or C10 tray. So I cut off the shock tower body mount posts. I left the back leg, and I was able to get that, you know, flex it just a little bit and get it mounted in there. You can kind of see a little bow, just barely, not much. It wasn't off by much, but I think that's just the nature of the beast. So I think it's ready for transmission motor mount now. The other half, the cab, see what this thing kind of looks like, and then add some links and hang the axles. Well, first bit of bad luck for the new year, as I was taking an X-Acto and kind of cleaning out the headlight holes, I accidentally dropped this on the tile floor and it broke. I broke at the base, at the windshield pillar, and at the top of the windshield pillar. So I tried a couple times to glue it with CA glue, and it has set up now for a little while. It may break as soon as I start threading this in, but got the rest of the chassis together, so we'll see. Hopefully this doesn't just stop this build cold. We can keep moving forward, but we'll see. Well, somehow I got lucky. It didn't re-crack on me. It took a little, you know, finagling to get all these screws aligned for this cab piece. I had to slot out this hole kind of side to side. I was getting a lot of bow in this panel, but other than that, they all went in. So the crack is here, the crack is down here, and it seems to still be holding with the CA glue. So the challenge will be getting everything wired in there without taking this on and off. You can see how the motor cable comes up between the battery tray and the back of the cab, and it kind of holds it back off of the motor can, which is nice. So the next thing is to go ahead and get these links hung. So I've got my deadbolt front and Jeep front 4 links separated out, and it's the first time I'm using the Hot Racing high clearance 4 link set. I've used their 3 link sets before that are high clearance. So I ended up getting 1 of each, and I'm just using the fronts. So obviously front, and then Jeep fronts will be the rear. So I get those on there, and then we can get the axles attached, I guess with some shocks. They're going to need some shocks to hang them, and then we'll get to wheels and tires. Well, I got this rear axle in there, and I'm not liking the angle of the diff. You can see that driveline angle, and the diff's leaning forward. And that's due to using the front links on the rear. So I'm sure the servo tray, you know, has the link mount in a different position. So really those upper links need to be a little bit longer to rotate this diff back, the top of it back. So luckily I've got some of these on hand. I've got some link risers for the rear diff. I ordered these off of Shapeways, and they come in 2s. So you just cut them apart, but you can see all of those mounting options, and they're at various heights. So really, in relation to the diff, it goes vertical and it goes forward. So I should be able to level that diff out with one of these mounting options. So I'm going to cut one of these out and swap it in. All right, link riser is in, and it still did not give me enough extension forward for those upper links, so I ended up using 2 of the aluminum flex blades. So those end up acting as kind of spacers and extensions off of this link riser. So because these new aluminum ones have 2 mount points, I can mount the links through one and mount one through the actual riser. And this rear hole I didn't use. This is the larger hole that's more of the rotational hole. Both of these are threaded. So you can see that helped level out this rear diff, straighten out that drive line, and especially at a full droop, it's not near as an extreme angle as it was. And then you can see this link riser does stick up a little bit, so that'll be my bump stop at the battery tray, which is not bad. I mean, it's right before the axle would hit. So we'll have to see what kind of droop and articulation we work out with the shock geometry, but I definitely like that rear drive line geometry a lot better now. So I think we'll move on to the front axle. And just from test fitting, I'm going to have to do the same thing to this brass axle. I'm going to have to sand down this inner edge, kind of widen out this link mount socket here, and then we'll see how the geometry of this one lines up. Well, I'm back at this rear diff. Decided to give it one more shot here with the stock diff cover, I guess link mount, and I still use the flex blades. I flipped them so the pivot is attached. I used some spacers in there, and then I mounted these to the second inward, and I figured I'd save my link riser for another application if I could use this stock diff cover, you know, link connection. So you can see I've lengthened that quite a bit to straighten this out, straighten out that angle. But now I may need to lengthen my my drive shaft a little bit, because my inner yeah, I think that's the longer inner right there. So I may just take this is the Jeep front. I could take a Jeep rear, and that may work just fine. If not, I'll just take an X-Acto and shave that down a little bit. But I think that's a viable solution, Gives me kind of a extended link mount, basically. Moves that hinge point up a little bit, but I don't think that's gonna negatively affect anything, but we'll see. This whole little chassis is going to be fairly unique. We only made it so far. I'm back at this rear diff again. I decided to give it one more arrangement. So I flipped these flex blades again on the stock link connection. So both of the threaded points are forward. One of them's going in, and then one of them's the extension basically for the link. And that puts this differential just about perfectly perpendicular to the ground plane. So that's a good orientation there. That's about as long as these uppers should have been, or where they would have mounted if there was a servo tray back here. So in doing that, this gives me the open pivot hole on these flex blades kind of sticking up over this diff. That gives me a nice mount point with a nut to put in these limiting straps. Now these are some extras I had from my Vader build. These are from Mofo RC. They're printed. They come in multiple links. But by attaching them here to the diff, I'm still going to keep all my pivot. It's just going to limit my full droop from like down here. It's going to pull it up a little bit. So I can play with that, but I think that's going to be a good starting point. I can't lean these straps or I lose a lot of that limit factor, so I've got them hung. I could always pop another hole or cut these off if I need them a little shorter, but I think I'm going to start there and get this other one installed, and that should wrap up the rear, and then we'll look at the front. All right, more progress. Got the front axle in. I did have to Dremel sand down that lower link mount on the axle to get rid of a little of that black coating so those would fit. And I'm not sure if I'm going to stick with these shocks, but I figured I'd go ahead and mount up wheels and tires, get those on there, and can kind of look at flex and compression. So you can see I've got one of these new Iroks mounted up. Looks very nice on this Mofo beadlock rim. It's the X2 S3 compound. It's very soft and sticky. This is the Super Duty black rim or ring. It's reversible. And you can see there the hub screws are covered, so you have to assemble both halves of the wheel, slip them in the ring in the tire, and then put this ring on last to actually mount the tire. So be a little bit of work to switch these hubs to 6s. I think he does have other rings that maybe don't cover those bolts, but with these particular ones you have to pull the ring if you're going to pull the hub. So I went ahead and I'm going to go with 3mm offset hubs on this. And I don't think I'm going to vent these. These have fairly narrow foams and they're a little shorter, so they already provide some give. And I think these scramblers here are going to be my alternates, and they are vented on this wheel. You can see there's a little ballooning here, but these have a lot of sidewall give. Let's see here. So I think I'm gonna start with these unvented and see how they perform. And then I think I'm gonna switch these scramblers over to these RC 4-wheel drive black deep dish, or I'm gonna make them deep dish. I'm gonna flip the hub to the back side to get more offset to kind of match that +3 of these wheels. Then I'll have 2 taller tires and alternate wheels for this guy. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these mounted up, and then we can kind of reassess the suspension travel and shock choice. One other quick thing I forgot to show here was just the difference in the hubs, the 6 and the 3. You can see the recess is just deeper in that 6 because it moves this hex position back. So that's the difference there, and then these are the little you know, scale hubs with a little nut in there, and that nut does have some nylock. And they come with a little special tool similar to the RC4 drive or the SSD hubs that you need to take them on and off. But all right, let's get these mounted up. Well, here's some progress. We've got wheels, tires, and shocks on. And I gotta say, I've been round and round with shock positions, limiting strap positions, ride height, springs. You can see I took off the hot racing springs. I went from their medium to their lights, and then I dug out some kinetic long travel springs. So I've got the very light pressure on the rear and the light pressure on the front of those kinetic springs. And those are basically just as long, a little bit softer than their hot racing soft springs. And then the very light pressure are extremely soft. May switch those up to the front. I moved the servo out. I did have it in the middle position on this adjustable tray with the track bar mounted to the front of the servo horn. I thought I was going to need to tuck that back, but with the ESC tray mounted at an angle, the top back edge of that servo becomes the limiting factor, hitting that tray. So by scooting it forward, I could get more up travel without, you know, moving that tray up within there. So nothing really changes about the front geometry. It's just the box, the servo box sits forward a little more, less tucked in. So on the front, I went from leaned back position for the shock. I had it here. I moved away from that because I was getting into it at full turn, full compression. Top of the tire was getting into the shock. And then two, I wasn't getting full compression with it mounted here. So I wasn't using the whole shock. So this way, the shock is out of the way. There's no rub at full compression. I can get full travel out of that shock, full compression. My limit straps keep me from full droop when they're both hanging, but then side to side I can get full flex and use all the shock. And then the same on the rear, limit straps keep it from full extension, but there's a pretty good amount of extension there. It's just a little shy of full. And then of course I can get full shock extension. These with the fenders, however, do not give me full compression. You can see there's a little bit of shock shaft remaining. Without the fenders, this will basically swing up until it hits the battery tray, or the axle hits the bottom of the chassis. There's nothing stopping it. Since these tires aren't super knobby, I'm all right with that hitting. When I had the shocks on the rear rotated to this position, they internally bump stopped about there, so there was never a rub. But then on the side to side, there was just shy of full usage of this other shock. So that's why I leaned them forward to just see, to get easier flex in the back and use the full length here. So I'll just say, you know, you could play with this all day. So I think I'm fairly happy right now. One thing about the shocks leaned, it can get this crazy squat. The front compression is there. So if I had the shocks leaned up a little bit, it would have been sitting about like that at full compression because those back shocks would bottom out. So that's not a bad option. I may go back to that. We'll just see. And I may swap these very light pressure springs up to the front so it sits down easier. If these are horizontal, the strength of the spring doesn't really matter. It's not really pushing anything up. So from there, I guess I fitted these rear fenders. So this was something that I've been thinking about since I had seen this chassis, kind of a JDM style wide body kit fender. And these were both rear sets from a C10 inner fender, the CC hand. So I'd cut off 2 of those making Valkyrie kits. So I had 4 of these guys sitting, and luckily I made nice clean cuts. And I'll just go back and kind of clean these up a little. So I've been wanting to reuse those on a project, so I started fitting these up, and then it started looking more and more like a Unimog. Which is pretty sweet, I must say. So these front ones, I've been debating if I'm going to go in the forward position so they lip out a little bit from the cab, or I would kind of like to do them, you know, more rearward, but that rear curve I think is going to stick down too far, and it may be a hindrance crawling. It just make it in the way. Whereas if it was riding, you know, something like this, nothing's hanging below the chassis. But you do, you know, the fender would break this clean edge, but really you've got the servo out in front, so the fender would basically be about even with that servo edge. So that's what I'm thinking. Sorry for the long spiel. I haven't even gotten the Scramblers mounted up. I've spent so much time working this suspension on the chassis. Haven't gotten the electronics in. I did get these foams out, and I've got some Crawler Innovation Little Nova medium and soft. So I was thinking of ditching these kind of firmer scrambler foams and going to these smaller, and of course you can cut the width, but you can see the diameter is already smaller, and of course they're both going to be a softer foam. And then I may vent the tires, or I'm thinking about drilling these wheels since I've got a lot of sets of these. I haven't drilled a set. But that's kind of the progress. So next stage hopefully will be a little more complete. Wow, those look really good. I thought I was in love with the Mofo RC wheels with the Super Duty black ring, and they did look good. But these Scramblers on the reversed RC4WD drive, now deep dish wheels, look great. And I vented the wheels. I drilled through the ring and then the rim, and then the foams I basically cut in half from what they give you, kind of that dimension. Basically split it down the middle, so they were a lot wider but shorter than the stock foams, and then the density is much softer. So these are the softer and these are the mediums. But since there's no weight really in that body, all the weight's on the axles, I think that'll be fine. It's basically riding on some pillows. So flex is great. Looks like the clearance is going to work out at the shock on full compression. Let's see if that's turned all the way. So that's about as extreme, and you can see, I mean, it's just barely touching, but the tire isn't even compressing against it. So these larger wheels and tires are going to work. And again, since the tread is fairly smooth, it's not a factor that they're going to rub on this smooth fender. Get into that. So I think this thing is looking pretty sweet, just getting better and better. So we're almost there. I think the next thing is to get these fenders sanded down evenly. One's a little longer than the other from the initial cut. So I'm going to tape that and get those evened out, looking a little cleaner. And then the challenge awaits. see if we can get that in here with maybe a little 3S in the front to power it. Front fenders on. Unimog in full effect. That was looking sweet. I swapped those very light pressure springs to the front. I think that was a good move. And then I'll get this in some light here. So this front screw, I had to, this was an existing hole in the fender flare, had to drill the chassis, and then there was an existing hole in the chassis there that just kind of fit at the edge of this large hole. And then I had to drill a hole in the fender flare, and there's an existing hole in the chassis that I used. So pretty easy. That's how it sits. Next order of business is seeing if we can get some electronics in. As you can see, I grabbed one of these converters from an Amazon like 6-pack, so I can plug into this little 3S battery, and you can see how tiny this battery is. Hoping to potentially fit it in the cab, get that weight cab forward up front, and then you know, I can use this as an extension, or I can trim back this shrink wrap here and actually plug in directly. And I may do that anyways to be able to fold those wires a little bit, get a little more play in that. And then I've got my receiver that I may or may not decase. So the trick, I think, is going to be kind of conceptualizing it and seeing if I can do it without taking one side of the chassis off. I could potentially just take the cab section off, but it kind of depends on what I'm going to mount to. So I'm going to give it a little thought and hopefully have it running next time I'm talking. Rocks on the table, you know what that means. This thing must be mobile. So I've got all the electronics in, went in with no issue, super easy. Maybe I'm just getting better at shoehorning small things into small spaces. But yeah, the Lizard Pro is on the side panel, receiver's on the roof, and the battery just slides right in, friction fit. It's wrapped like 4 times with a rubber band to keep its wires snug to it. So that just basically holds it in place once you get it in there. I mean, that battery is snug. So plenty of room in the cab. I did leave the 2S lead coming off the Pro that comes with, just in case I want to run a 2S in the back. So this 3S battery has the extension conversion, which is nice and convenient, you know, for plugging it in. You get a little more length to work with. Let's see here. One trick I do is twist these up a little to put a little tension on them. and they all just tuck in there nice and snug. And of course the switch is right here through the window on the side, so easy access, at least with small fingers or tweezers. So I guess just a few notes on the build. Gotta say I'm very impressed with the little chassis. You know, the cab breakage was my fault. Totally dropped the part from 4 feet on tile floor, and it's thin right there. But it did hold with the glue, and I contacted the creator and he's sending me out a couple of spares. So I may swap those in or just see if this one holds, but for now it looks good. It may be reinforced fine with both side panels. I think I've got 2 good tire wheel combos, but I am kind of liking the Scrambler deep dish maybe more. Tell me what you think in the comments. These things remind me of the Arctic build Toyota Hilux, the giant balloon snow tires. But I guess one other thing I didn't mention is I used the RC4 drive aluminum hexes all the way around. These Mofo RC wheels were tight on the plastic hexes, so I sanded all of those down and got those where they were slipping in and out all right. But even the sanded down plastic hexes, of course, were getting stuck in these deep dish Steely's. And that's typical of those RC4 drive. Something about them, they're just a tight fit. So those aluminum hexes they make are perfect and they fit both wheels easily. So I swapped those in. Other than that, I think this was not an easy build. I assume this would go together super quick. I would say it's not for beginners. There's a lot of suspension tuning options, playing with links and limit straps. So I mean, it's not necessarily hard, but there's multiple ways you could set it up, depending exactly what the hardware you're using is. So I would recommend it, however. It's super cool, and I really love these fenders, and I'm glad I got to get some usage out of those, since I cut a third of $30 fenders off. So that's basically $10 on the front and $10 on the rear. So I'm glad I got to put those to use. So I think the only thing left here is to flip the switch and get this guy running over some of these rocks. All right, initial test, take 1. So don't judge too hard. The tuning begins here. So this is just kind of to see where this initial setup is. See if we can not flip forward. Yeah, you may have to adjust the limit straps on the front to pull that nose down, keep it from turning back on these steep descents like this. It's pretty common for these sticky tires to catch and then want to flip the whole vehicle back. There we go. Oh, a little bit of a face plant. So it'll be interesting to see how those Irok Super Swampers do versus these Scramblers. And I may actually need to go a little firmer in the front on these Scramblers. There's so much tire roll when you turn the wheels. I could swap maybe the soft to the back and put those mediums in the front. But I may need to go back to the stock Scrambler foams and just trim those down since those are quite a bit denser. I think definitely some trio rear counterweights on the axle will help. It's just a challenge with this short wheelbase because you get vertical so quick. So I gotta keep I need to bring the nose down on climbs, so I might need to bring everything down. Just doesn't want to take any steep climb right now. Yeah. Alright, let's switch tires. Alright, swap the wheels and tires, and I've already started doing a little tuning here, trying to get this CG down a little bit more. So I think I was getting a little bit of kind of spring action from those printed limiting straps. So I disconnected those from the rear and just set them on the inside, and then it's kind of a happy accident. I was gonna mess around with them, but then I found that they're still acting as limiters with those screws hanging out. If they're on the inside, they just catch. So I think I'm gonna leave those for now because they're not obviously springing it back up, but they will catch it at a point. And then the fronts, in lieu of drilling a new hole or drilling a new hole in the strap, I've just kind of compressed them and tried to fold them to take some of that spring out of them, and it seems to be working. They seem to be sitting flat, and then they still have the same limit, but they're not kind of pushing it up as much. So the flex stayed about the same. So we'll get it on the rocks here and see if that made any improvement, and then test these tires out as well. Take two, Irok Super Swamper test. A little suspension tuning. We're still tipping back. Not bad. Let's try this approach. These limiting straps on the rear seem to work. There we go. These Iroks are getting grip. can make the descent. I feel like that tuning has made a little bit of a difference. Still need to get the nose down on the climb. I am liking these tires. This might be a roll. No? Oh, yep. Little nose plant. So, tell me what you think in the comments, which wheel tire combo you prefer. Let's try this guy again, but I think that may do it for this build session. I have ordered a couple more little things to tune this guy with, so stay tuned for a little tuning session, and maybe next time we'll be able to get over something this steep. Thanks for watching.